It's Monday, it's 12:15 and we're live in Westminster. After those US strikes on Iran's nuclear sites, now President Trump suggests he wants to see regime change.
I recognise that there's a discussion about regime change, but that is not what's under consideration.
Ministers want the group that broke into this RAF base and spray-painted 2 military planes to be proscribed as a terrorist organisation.
The actions that they undertook at Brize Norton were also completely unacceptable, and it's not the first. It's the fourth attack by that group on a key piece of UK defence infrastructure.
Nigel Farage says wealthy non-doms should be able to pay a fee to avoid many UK taxes, and that money would then be given to low-paid workers.
These people are the big spenders. So, yes, this is a sum of money that goes in one direction, but it's our very strong view this will generate a lot more wealth.
And we'll talk to Sarah Vine about her new book, How Not to Be a Political Wife. Joining me, Labour MP Kelvin Bailey, Conservative MP and Shadow Business Minister Dame Harriet Baldwin, and alongside the Daily Mail's Sarah Vine, Paul McNamee, the editor of The Big Issue. This is Politics Live. And let's start with the fallout from this weekend's American attacks on Iran's nuclear sites and the response there's been from the world and from Donald Trump as well. Here is the president's post on his social media site Truth Social from last night, saying it's not politically correct to use the term regime change, but if the current Iranian regime is unable to make Iran great again, why wouldn't there be a regime change? So the question really is President Trump right to be talking about this, Kelvin?
No, to be quite frank. I think there are two separate issues here at play. The first is how we came about to have US involvement in what's happening in Iran. And we've got to recognise that we have international processes and structures, and we try and cohere these decisions through the international mechanism to make sure that they are done in a way that takes our allies along with us. So there is a degree of upset that, or concern about how these things have come about. But in terms of the policy outcomes, no one wants to see Iran with nuclear missiles, and therefore the fact that we stand alongside our allies, saying that that the US that has taken action on its own without the support of the UK and without the concurrence or prior knowledge of the UK has brought about perhaps an important bookend to what has been happening is quite important. And the bookend is very important as well, because we must return this to a diplomatic solution. We must enter a diplomatic process, and we must go about the process of bringing Iran back into the international fold.
Harriet?
I think one of President Trump's great diplomatic achievements in his first term as president was something called the Abraham Accords, where countries in the Middle East actually recognised the state of Israel, started diplomatic relations, and there are still some holdouts, clearly. And I think that the only way forward in terms of the diplomacy is for there to be recognition from countries that have been opposing Israel's right to exist, have been, in the case of Iran, trying to obliterate the country of Israel, that if we're to move forward to a two-state solution, which has been the long-held UK government position, that it needs to be in full recognition of the state of Israel by Israel's enemies. And so I think that is a continuation of what President Trump was able to achieve in his first term as president.
But when it comes to regime change, is the president right to talk about regime change in Iran?
I think what he's talking about is about the change to a regime that recognises and has diplomatic relations with Israel. We can all see that that is essential for there to be progress in terms of peace in the Middle East. And he has changed things in terms of Abraham Accords with other countries. I think he's continuing to try and achieve that policy. He has obviously changed his stance towards Syria. The US has had a major shift in terms of Syria. I think the only way forward for this very troubled region is for all of Israel's enemies to recognise that it is a legitimate state set up after the Second World War that has the right to exist, and only then can we move forward.
Paul, is the president right to talk about regime change in Iran?
I don't think he is. I don't think that that is something that the West, and inevitably it will be the West, because it's not just going to be the US, but the West should be getting involved in enforcing regime change, because it never ever works. And there's always unintended consequences, both for the nation themselves and for the wider geopolitical landscape that we all find ourselves in. I mean, at the moment, we don't know, in simple things, for instance, whether the price of oil and fuel is going to go up. So that means that those people in Britain, for instance, who are in poverty at the moment, face higher bills because of the action of the president. And yes, you know, you may have a point that this is about bringing a rogue nation slightly more to heel, but it just doesn't work. There's never been a clear way of saying, well, instead of this organisation, it's going to be this person. I heard some people last night on BBC talk about bringing back the equivalent of the Shah of Iran, which it just feels as though we've gone back 50 years and geopolitics haven't moved on at all. And Donald Trump saying it's not politically correct to use the term regime change. I'm not convinced that he understands what politically correct means, never mind regime change. So for this man to have that amount of power to make us all dance to his tune is terrifying. And
what about the decision to bomb those nuclear facilities? Do you see that differently to talk about regime change or not? You just think he shouldn't have got involved?
There was no clear reason to do that we know of. If there was an issue with Iran trying to enrich uranium, which we're all told that there is, then surely a diplomatic way down. And I know that Iran is not an honest broker when it comes to an awful lot of talks, and perhaps sometimes you need a strong arm. But this just feels as though it's slightly lashing out without looking towards the end game.
Sarah, do you think diplomacy,
well,
or do you think
it's difficult
for
you know, you have a country like Iran which has a stated aim of destroying the state of Israel, and it's enriching, it's getting itself a nuclear bomb. Well, what is Israel supposed to do? Just wait until it goes ahead and gets one? So you can understand why they've taken action. I think you're absolutely right. I think the main thing now is to try and return to diplomat. I mean, what we've had is a show of strength, and that's that, but it should not progress to anything more. As to regime change, well, I mean, I think that's up to the Iranian people, quite honestly. And they've had a lot of people imposed on them that perhaps haven't always been good for them. And I generally think that it's up to them.
We're about to see pictures of those B-2 bombers returning to their base in Missouri. That was after the attack on those facilities, and we still don't know an awful lot about how successful or otherwise those have been in terms of destroying what was there. Obviously, the president says it was very highly successful. Kelvin, I mean, do you think the president was right to do this?
Well, I think
do we wait until Iran gets this bomb before acting?
I think there's a number of things that have come out here, and like moving across the discussion. It's important for us to make sure that these countries, across the Middle East, recognise Israel, but we've also got to make sure that we recognise Palestine, so that there is a balanced and genuine solution going forward. It's also very important that when we're talking about the outcomes or the reasons for taking military action, that we're very specific about it, because part of the problem that we have in this country with talking about the military action and security is the gap in trust. The idea that that we're not being told something and things are being drawn together. And what Donald Trump has done by pulling regime change, which, as Paul's raised, has got some questionable narrative, alongside enriching uranium and the wanting to use it to destroy a country, are entirely separable. And what we must do is keep them clear. Delivering one policy outcome, which is to remove nuclear weapons from a state, is very definitely something that we wish to see. Going about regime change... Although
the Prime Minister doesn't sound quite sure about that. He seems to like the ends but not the means.
But it is unhelpful, us clouding the discussion, because what that doesn't allow us to do is to make the case for something that we must do. because we tend to see, and I'm sure we'll discuss Bryce Norton later, we only tend to really believe these things when we have policy failings. And were Iran to enrich uranium, which we know it was doing following the failure of the JCPOA, were it to put that on a ballistic missile and be in the same situation as North Korea, and we saw a policy failing of it, then we'd be dealing with catastrophic and large loss of life, and we would be held to account. So it's really important that we do separate these things, and I think that's what the government is trying to do. Unfortunately, I don't think the US government has done that in the way that Paul's brought that out.
I think there's an uncomfortable feeling around the way that Trump makes these announcements. You know, you just feel like there's a person there who's not completely, you know, I don't know, he just feels like a loose cannon, you know, doing it on Truth Social. This is not where you should have the conversation about regime change if you're going to have it. He needs to balance that sort of showman, maverick, politician identity that he has with a person who is basically dealing with a very difficult and complex and very serious situation that could lead, if it goes wrong, to a lot of people dying.
Paul, do you think it's right that the government or America takes action before we get to that stage where Iran might have a bomb? Do you really think diplomacy can work? I mean, there's lots of people who feel that actually, you know, it hasn't really been working, and that, as you said, you can't totally trust what Iran says. You need to do something more.
I think it's got to be worth more investment in it, more investment in time, more investment in people, because it's not just Iran that has not been honest. America has not played even with Iran when it comes to particular talks. So I think that you can't, while you can point the finger at Iran and say, well, we don't know what you're going to do, that's the same with America. And if you look at it...
But do you see those as equivalents? Do you see that you don't see those as equivalents, or do you? Like the American government and the Iranian...
But surely is that not what negotiation is? That you enter into it and you say, well, I can see it from your perspective, you see it from mine, and let's see where the common ground is. Because if you begin... I mean, Trump is a businessman. He seems to like the ends, but he doesn't like the means, which is why I think he does these things off the cuff, because he doesn't have to take responsibility for the means. He just wants the ends. But if that is the ends that he wants, then he must understand the value of negotiation.
OK, let's move on, because a protest started a short while ago in Trafalgar Square, just up the road in central London. And that's because the Home Secretary is about to ban the Palestine Action, the group who broke into this RAF base last week. So last week, members of the group broke into Bryce Norton, and you can see the damage that was inflicted on a couple of planes there. You can see that there was red paint sprayed into the jet's engine onto this Airbus Voyager. So that has prompted the Home Secretary to say that she wants to proscribe the group, which effectively bans it as a terror organisation. It means that it would be a criminal offence to belong to the group. Kelvin, you're a former RAF officer. That break-in at Bryce Norton, it may well have been a criminal act. Do you think that's a terrorist act?
So I think the first thing to set out, yes, I served at that station for nearly 8 years, and I served in the military for nearly 25 years to make sure that people can have the right to protest. And one of the things I found that separated me from my American counterparts in the States was that I actually enjoyed and liked the fact that we had a discerning public that challenged our political class to make sure that the decisions that were applied of our military were made in good judgment. And so that is the first thing to kind of set out. Bryce Norton, and what we saw, there's 6,000 service people that serve at that base. What we saw was the manifestation of years of underinvestment. And we have seen over the weekend that a number of people have come out and levelled these policy failings at those people that were in charge now, whereas actually we need to have a longer look, and we need to look back about the decisions that our country and the government has made that resulted in the failings that were there. And that is really quite important, because it is wrong for us to allow those people that are in charge now to carry the can.
But do you think that the people who did this is that a terrorist act?
So the choice that those people decided to make was that they viewed that their political, the political message that they wanted to get across was more important than the protection and security of our country, because those aircraft are there for quick reaction, alert for terrorism and for the safety and security of our nation. And whilst I am fully behind protest, and whilst I think the messages of the surrounding the things that they're trying to make are very important, we must remember that they chose over the safety and security of our country to make a political message. And that is not something that we can tolerate, because, as I said earlier, when those choices, those failings manifest, then the can is carried by someone else.
Well, we're seeing some pictures now of that. There's a protest supporting the group that's happening in Trafalgar Square. Paul, what do you make of this decision by the Home Secretary that she wants to proscribe that group? So she's saying that that is a terrorist act.
I think it's interesting that Calvin is essentially saying that this is diversionary by the government, rather than admitting responsibility for ease of entry to that particular place and saying we need to step up the security around it, to then point the finger at some people who very easily got in basically under a fence and did something. I don't think that it is a terrorist operation. I don't think that it was there to do something to bring down the state or to damage the state or damage necessarily the security of the country. I don't know a great deal about that particular organisation, and it feels quite heavy-handed to use that, and we've heard there's 3 other incidents, to then prescribe them as a terrorist organisation. Perhaps if the government wishes, they could look at the individual acts and go after them rather than go after the whole organisation. Because I think that once you make that whole organisation a terrorist organisation, 2 things will happen. One, there will be a certain amount of martyrdom that people will say, well, we're standing up for the people in Palestine and look what the government are doing to us. And the second thing is that any other pro-Palestine or pro-Gaza organisation is then tarred with that brush, and they're easily dismissed, even if they're incredibly peaceful. They say, well, you're part of this terrorist arc. And I think that's really damaging.
Kelvin, so it's going too far?
Sorry, can I just be clear? I agree actually largely with what Paul said. I don't think it's diversionary. I think what we've just seen is a manifestation of underinvestment. Like, that has got to be that's the first thing.
So you don't agree with what Yvette Cooper's going to do?
What Yvette Cooper is doing is based on the things that we don't see. And what I'm likening them to is the fact that we don't know publicly the extent of the activities that this organisation has undertaken. We have seen a choice that they have made that has massive national implications. And we must not forget that this is an organisation that attacked a police officer with a sledgehammer. So the other things that sit behind this, and my point is that should she not take the action based on the information that she is presented with, and we see a failure, be that a loss of life or a major incident from our national security, then it will be her that carries the can, and that is something that only she can choose.
Harriet?
Well, clearly it's criminal, and we clearly don't know what the intelligence is behind who's funding them, who's backing them, and I would certainly support it if the Home Secretary comes to that conclusion that it's important to prescribe this organisation. But it's, I think, also really important that the government harden defences of all our incredibly important military assets, which are here for us to defend us, but not only here in the UK, but as we heard over the weekend, there was also someone arrested for spying for Iran outside Akrotiri. So really important that I think that we review all of these
there are significant gaps,
protocols.
except for that is very difficult to take when for 14 years we saw the erosion of our military. And one of the issues that we have is the separation, like this, it's Armed Forces Week. Like, one of the things, 30 years ago, when I entered the military, we were having discussions about whether we should have lesbians and gays and bisexuals in the military. And at the time I said that it was imperative that we got people like me in the military to make the military reflective of society and have and hold those values. And what we do by not reflecting or supporting our military is by denying it access to the full society, like our full extent of our society. We need everyone in there so it's an organisation reflective of who we are. And when we have these incidents and when we make it about things that aren't entirely like the issue, then we deny the organisation the ability to reflect society.
Well, I think I just heard Calvin try and blame all of this on the last government, which is extraordinary. So I hope that you will acknowledge that it is. I hope you will acknowledge that it is your government that is in charge now, that you have allocated money to this, and that it is a different security environment where we clearly need to step up security at all the bases.
This is a manifestation of something that's happened in the past. The people in charge of the base at the moment did not put those fences in, and they have not ignored the fact that those fences or the security around the base has been below par. It is not right for those people to wear that. That is 14 years of underinvestment.
Let's have a look at comments by the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, Sir Mark Rowley, related to this. And we've been seeing pictures of that protest in Trafalgar Square. He has criticised that, saying that actions in support of such a group go beyond what most would see as legitimate protest. The criminal charges faced by Palestine Action members represent a form of extremism that I believe the overwhelming majority of the public rejects. Sarah, do you think that he's right to say that this protest that's going on right now?
Well, I thought it was interesting what you said earlier, Calvin, about the Home Secretary probably has information that isn't made public, so that they wouldn't be doing this if they didn't have that. I mean, I have to say, as someone who's had, you know, when I was married to Michael Gove, and we had quite a few terrorist threats. We had Northern Irish terrorist threats. We had the man who killed David Amos tried to kill Michael. He stalked our house. You know, when you get in, when the police and the security services get involved, there is so much that you can't divulge because it's really important to their wider operations. So if she's doing this, I suspect she's doing it for a pretty good reason. I agree with a lot of what you say about not making them into martyrs, but I don't think, you know, there's a difference between legitimate protest and vandalism and criminal activity, and there's no barrier to legitimate protest in this country. There's no one stopping you from having a peaceful protest. But when it shades into that kind of activity, then I think it is.
Paul, Mark Rowley is saying this is beyond legitimate protest.
I think he needs to be clear. It may be, as Sarah says, that there's intelligence, there's information that we don't know about. What exactly does he mean is beyond legitimate protest? Does he mean the specific incidents of breaking into RAF Bryce Norton? Does he mean something else? I think this goes back to something that you said earlier, Calvin. It's the separation between what people understand and a gap in knowledge and what they feel they're not being told. And sometimes when that exists, either conspiracy theories grow or else distrust grows. And that's why if this is going to happen, there needs to be much more information.
There's a brilliant, if you read this month's big issue, there are discussions about how young people view the world. And it's really important that we understand where that gap is and where that deficit is. And it is our responsibility as responsible politicians to try and meet those gaps with honesty and honest discussion and discourse so that we can try and close the gap.
But also there's an obligation to protect the security of the country. I mean, that's what the Home Secretary has to do. She cannot, you know, as you say, if something happens and someone gets killed, it's on her watch.
But if there's a gap in trust, we have got to work out how we have meaningful discussion and close it.
It's quite revolting and distasteful to see people holding up banners supportive of Ayatollah Khamenei on the streets of London. But, you know, we are a free country and you're entitled to say those sorts of things.
OK, let's talk now about Reform UK's new policy, which they have announced today, the Britannia Card. The policy gives new or returning non-DOMs the chance to pay £250,000 one-off fee to shield them from paying tax and encourage them to stay in the UK. The money would be redistributed to Britain's lowest paid workers. We can now talk to Zia Youssef, who is head of DOGE, that's Department of Government Efficiency for Reform UK. Could you just explain the idea behind this policy and how it would work?
Yeah, of course. Look, we've got to make Britain a prosperous and powerful country again. One ingredient to do that is you need the world's wealth creators, the world's job creators the world's best people at doing those things here in the UK, not in Singapore and Monaco and Dubai and America and Saudi Arabia. So what we're saying is we're going to charge them a £250,000 landing fee. That allows them to not pay tax. Importantly, just to correct your introduction there, on foreign earnings, they will still contribute substantially above and beyond that to UK taxes, roughly £120,000 a year each. And all of that money at the end of each tax year, within 90 days, will be wired to the 2.5 million lowest earning full-time workers in the country. So we're restoring the social contract. We're helping the people grafting hardest for the least with the cost of living crisis, and we're going to make Britain prosperous again.
Now, not all of the non-doms, of course, have left the country, have they? There are a lot here who, as you say, are paying an awful lot of tax, billions of pounds. So what will happen to those who have stayed here?
Well, okay, so let's be really clear about what we're saying. We're saying that they won't pay taxes on foreign earnings and foreign gains and income tax on foreign assets, right? And that makes us competitive with places like Monaco and Dubai and Singapore and all of these other countries, Italy, Portugal, who are welcoming these people with open arms. We have seen that population collapse from 140,000 to probably closer to 60,000 now over the last 2 decades. They're being chased away. And in that time, real GDP per person in this country has been stagnant. Real wages have been stagnant. So what we're saying is we're going to invite those people back here. We're going to charge them up front £250,000 to get started. And we're going to send that money directly to the 2.5 million people who are grafting hardest for the least.
But just to explain, so the non-doms who haven't left, they won't be able to do this?
Well, it depends what you're talking about. So it's not going to be available to British residents. If you are a non-dom if you're a non-dom who's already here, you've got to remember these people are already fleeing. So we will have strict criteria about who is eligible and who isn't.
Lots of them haven't fled.
Well, a lot of them are. I mean, the OBR forecast that Rachel Reeves's changes to the non-dom programme would raise 30-odd billion in the first 5 years. They base that forecast on a decline in that population of 1.5% a year. The Treasury is now briefing against Rachel Reeves, trying to get her to U-turn, because that is already 10% have left, and we haven't even had a year yet. We are seeing an absolute exodus from this country. And what that means is, according to the Adam Smith Institute, that will cost this country £115 billion and 45,000 jobs over the next decade. We have to have those people back. They are going to contribute billions in tax in this country, starting with that £250,000 upfront cost, which goes straight to working people in this country.
And in terms of the working people, you have said specifically you have to be full-time.
Yeah.
Why have you decided to do that, and how is HMRC going to find these people?
Well, we've done it specifically because HMRC has that information. HMRC has the information as to who is in full-time work, and HMRC has the information as to how they can wire that money directly into their bank accounts, just like somebody who fills out a self-assessment tax return who is in employment. So they already have the ability to do it. We have chosen that because it's a substantial...
So a lot of women who are part-time with caring responsibilities, you wouldn't qualify for this?
We had to make the SIP programme simple to understand, and we are really focused. Look, there's going to be a lot of women who are working full-time jobs, struggling to make ends meet. The amount of money they're going to be getting, according to our Conservative forecast, is around £600 tax-free every single year. We think that could be north of £1,000 ultimately, and all of that money goes directly to people who are in full-time work. Look, Reform makes no apology for this. We are on the side of people who set their alarm clocks before they go to bed and rise early in the morning and do hard graft. We're on their side, and we need the economy to grow. I mean, you've been talking on this programme about defence spending and underinvestment. For the last decade, you can barely find a single year where GDP in this country has grown faster than the population. Reform is the only party willing to have these conversations.
Let's just bring in the panel here. Kelvin, what do you make of this policy?
Well, I'll make it very simple for you to understand. It's a tax doge, or is it dodge? This is a golden ticket for billionaires, isn't it? I mean, pay a little and then we'll just ignore the rest. There is a reason why our government was brought about, and that's because people wanted to see change. They want to see change. They want to see meaningful taxes, and there are a number of things that our government has brought about, including taxing private schools, which may not be popular in all quarters, which probably says it's a good policy, but also how we have adjusted the tax system in this part of the economy. Now, whilst there might be some ebbing and flowing, it's important that if you earn money and you live in this country and you take the benefits of being in this country, then you pay.
Zia, a tax dodge for the wealthy?
It's just extraordinary. I mean, the fact that people in government are talking about the success of a policy based on who's angry about it. It was a Labour government and a Labour Chancellor that hiked the capital gains tax rate, apparently because it was going to increase revenue to the Exchequer. What's happened? The revenue from capital gains tax is down 10%, £1.5 billion less to pay for hospitals, to pay for schools, to pay for roads, to pay for our military. These are people with no experience of how the world actually works. Let me be clear again. These people will pay £250,000 just to land here, and then will pay each £120,000 plus per year in direct taxation, and that's before you even get to VAT and stamp duty, land tax, and all of the other contributions they make in terms of corporation tax that these people, in terms of companies they run. Reform has a leadership team who have experience in private business. None of the Labour cabinet understand how the world of business and economics works, and that's why, yes, you won the election last year. The reason why Labour, their support has collapsed is because they have clownish policies that are making everyone in this country poorer.
Calvin, do you want to come back on that? I'll bring in Harriet after that.
Indeed. Says the Department of Doge, or Dodge. We have brought about fairer tax policies, windfall tax, private equity tax. There is some, like I said, there is some ebb and flow, but I'll take an affront to 25 years working on the receiving end of poor tax policies, poor investment, and this just, it literally points to what Liz Truss did, which is what Nigel Farage said. You know, Liz Truss gave a good policy, like this was... If you are comfortable with atrophying our economy, doing it the size of significant damage by giving handouts out to billionaires, please explain where the money is coming from to fund the NHS. Please explain where the money is coming from to fund our services. Because, like, these golden tickets are meaningless.
Let me bring in Harriet here. I mean, it was policy. There was a similar policy under the last government. Jeremy Hunt scrapped the non-dom status,
which was for non-doms to pay £60,000 a year to have that status. And the problem was that when Rachel Reeves announced her Halloween budget last October, she changed the rules around non-doms and their assets held overseas, so that when if they were to die here and have assets overseas, that they would pay inheritance tax of 40% on it. And so there has been a millionaire leaving the UK every 45 minutes.
Well, there is some speculation. Just look at
in.
this headline from The Observer, that the Chancellor faces U-turn on tax rules after non-doms take fright, and it's the extension to potentially having inheritance tax.
They need to U-turn on that. We welcome the U-turn they've made on the winter fuel allowance. We welcome the U-turn they've made in terms of the grooming gangs, and they need to U-turn on this as well.
Paul, what do you make about the plan from Reform UK?
It's a headline in search of a strategy, really, and it's done very well because obviously we're sitting talking about it. But it's impossible to really see beneath it, to see how it's going to actually, in effect, function. I think, what they're essentially doing is working out what will play well. Tax the rich. A lot of people use that as a simple phrase. That's kind of what they're doing. So therefore, that's going to play well. Who's going to argue necessarily with that? But then, how much is it going to be raised? Who's going to get it? How are they going to get it? A big issue, we're all about work and opportunity. That's what we're based and founded on. So we're always going to support any party that wants to help people get into work and stay in work. But this doesn't feel like that. Gordon Brown had working family tax credits. Is this a version of that? Because that worked well, but that was Gordon Brown who knew what he was talking about.
Sarah?
Well, you kept asking him what was going to happen to the existing non-doms. They obviously haven't really thought it through, because he clearly didn't have an answer to that question. That's why he didn't answer it. And I think that I understand the importance of having these very wealthy people in the country, because of course they generate a lot from the economy, restaurants, clothes, builders, all of that kind of stuff. They are engines of growth. But on the other hand, I think this just highlights how inexperienced Reform really are. They've never run anything. They've never been in government. They have these ideas. They are a little bit, I think, pie in the sky. I think this one is pie in the sky.
Let Zia come back on that. Pie in the sky, Zia.
Well, if you'd actually like to, if anyone on the panel actually cared and bothered, they could go and read our 12-page policy document,
sure they
which
will, straight
answer
after this.
all of those questions. So we have put a lot of thought into this. And, you know, you talk about not running anything, unlike, let me reiterate, the entire Labour cabinet, who not a single one has had, I would argue, a job of significant consequence in the private sector. We have serious people, entrepreneurs who have built companies from scratch, sold them for hundreds of millions of pounds, who understand how the real economy works. And by the way, we also have our fingers on the pulse of working people. They would receive £600 to £1,000 each as a direct payment, tax-free, from HMRC. So we've thought it through. We're the only ones who are coming up with any innovative ideas, by the way, as to how you get the British economy growing again. You talk about how things are going to be paid for. This Labour government just added £130 billion to the borrowing bill for everyone in this country and their kids in the last major announcement alone. All successive governments have done is spend profligately and just whack it all on a credit card. We're the only ones with serious ideas about how we grow the economy.
Okay, Zia Youssef, thank you very much for joining us today to explain your policy. Let's move on now and talk about Sarah's book, which is called How Not to Be a Political Wife. And I suppose the sort of first question is why did you decide to write it?
Well, I'm a writer, so the way I make sense of things is I put them down on paper, and the whole sort of psychodrama of the last Tory government and Brexit, etc., had been swirling around my head for a very long time. I thought I'd quite like to draw a line underneath it. Everyone else has written a book about it. Lots of people, David Cameron, Sacha Swire, they've all done their thing. And I thought I would just do my own. And, it's quite cathartic, really.
Yeah, at times it doesn't sound like a
it's
positive experience. I mean, you sort of wrote, politics trampled my health, my happiness, my marriage, my sanity. I mean, it's a huge personal cost.
Yeah, I think the thing is, so much has been written about the sort of politics of those times, but very little has been written about the people and the emotions. And I'm all about the emotions. I know that's a great failing. People keep reminding me I should be less emotional, but I can't help it. This is what I am. And I think that I hoped, or I had this idea that maybe people might be interested in seeing a little bit behind all the kind of headlines and just knowing what went on. And I mean, it is not just about Brexit, to be honest. It is also my memoir, so there's a lot in there about my life generally. But I don't know. I just wanted to do it because I sort of want to move on myself a little bit as well. And it's today's the 9th anniversary, isn't it, of Brexit? Can you believe it?
I think you said Brexit was like EastEnders on.
Oh my goodness, yes, EastEnders on acid, really. I mean, it just was like it was just such a psychodrama. And
we are seeing some pictures of you here with Samantha Cameron, and obviously you fell out because of politics.
Yes, I mean politics is a really. I mean, I hate to say this because I've got two politicians here, but it's a very, very toxic world. It does destroy relationships. It does destroy friendships. It's very hard to keep a level head when you're in the eye of the storm. Everything is a compromise. We see this all the time. And I just wanted to give people a sense of that reality, because I think often politicians front very well and we all try to pretend that, it's all going really smoothly, but actually it's not. And a lot of the time you are lurching from crisis to crisis, and it's just trying to make sense of what happened. And also, really, it's a book about my own mistakes. That's why it's called How Not to Be a Political Wife, with a picture of a woman face planting on the front. It's about how all the mistakes that I made and all the misjudgments I made and all the things I probably would have done differently if I'd had some insight or if I'd thought more carefully about it.
Kelvin, just to bring the politicians in on this, is it possible to have political friendships? Do they sometimes suffer because of what goes on in politics?
No,
a toxic atmosphere?
So we do, and I think there is, without being politic, there is a remarkable consensus around the generation of people that have entered politics with me, because a lot of them have like really meaningful backgrounds, and it's a genuine privilege to just be in and around them. But the first thing I would say is, like, we must be emotional. It's wrong to say that we shouldn't. It's really important that we do, because the biggest problem I see is a lack of empathy.
Yeah.
There's a lack of empathy amongst each other. There is but the biggest thing is there is a lack of empathy with the public. The public seems to view us as though like we are a manifestation for every problem. And, you'll see that with the protest today. It's almost impossible for us to go and engage sometimes, because we have gone beyond the point where we're allowed discourse. And that is a really unpleasant position to put your families in, and it is not pleasant at all.
Harriet?
Yeah, I look forward to reading Sarah's book, and I personally have found public service to be incredibly rewarding. There are things that you can achieve on behalf of your community, things that you can achieve on behalf of your country, and by and large, I think we do, even across the aisle, we work well together, and there are things that we can achieve collectively. So I wouldn't want your viewers to be in the least bit put off going into politics. It's a fantastic privilege to serve. But having said that, of course, it has its human elements and its dramas, and for the spouses out there and the partners out there, I do pay tribute to what they have to put up with sometimes.
I mean, I don't. You wouldn't want it to. One of the things I think that happens in politics is that it becomes a shrinking pool, because to succeed in politics, you have to be a certain type of person who is so tough, who is so resilient. And actually, as you say, you want real people in this world, because that's how you get good politics. Sorry, I interrupted. I apologise.
Did you ever be tempted to go into politics?
Not at all. Not in the least.
Because of a toxicity?
I think the toxicity. Maybe? Also, I do think that it would be very difficult to toe the party line. I think that must be one of the most difficult things, that if you've got a particular personal belief and you're told, well, just put that to the side because this is the line and you better walk that line, boy, or you're out the door. I'm not sure I could do that. I've just had one question to you, Sarah. Did Michael Gove ever change any of his policy because of anything you said to him?
We had a lot of arguments about legalisation of drugs, which I think I might have kind of shifted him on a little bit.
In which way?
Well, I take a very sort of liberal view, which I know that my colleague Peter Hitchens, with whom I do a podcast, doesn't agree with. But I'm slightly more pragmatic. No, he did listen to me on things, definitely. Prisons was another one. When he was prisons minister, it was an extraordinary moment, because he went and visited so many prisons, and he became very engaged in the welfare of prisoners. He was very struck by how hopeless that system is and how much reform it needs. But of course, he never got to do it because.
Do you think, just finally, do you think political wives get a tougher time than political husbands?
Oh yes, because if you're a woman, it's always all your fault, because it can't be the man's fault because he's a man. So the whole Lady Macbeth thing, if you're a woman and you have a view about what people think is a man's business, then you're automatically cast as a sort of scheming witch, when that's probably not your intention.
And do you think, Victoria Starmer has very much kept out of the limelight, hasn't she?
She's playing a blinder. I think she's got it down to a T. I think she should just carry on doing what she's doing, just stay out of the limelight, keep your head down, don't get involved.
Do you wish you'd stayed out of the limelight?
Yeah,
you're a journalist, so it's maybe slightly different.
Because I was a journalist and I would have had to have completely given up my chosen career, which I was already, quite far down the line in. So, what I probably should have done is become a classic Tory wife and just spent my life making cakes and doing combo.
Harriet, do you think that's a classic Tory wife? Is that fair?
Oh dear, well, I haven't met someone along those lines for a long period of time, and I think, again, I would reiterate, I do think it is hard on the partners. You do need a really supportive partner, or in my case, husband, and I do think that they do have to put up with a lot of us being absent a lot of the time, and it is from that point of view quite a challenge for families, but we're still here, and do
you think political wives have a tougher time? Very briefly before we stop, do you think political?
I think often women in all walks of life are judged in a different way than men in all walks of life. Yeah.
OK, we'll leave it there. That's all for today. But I'll be back tomorrow with more Politics Live at 12:15 here on BBC Two and on the iPlayer. Thank you for watching.